Today we're going to start to learn to complete the square. In order to do this is just another way of solving quadratic equations. We learned one method is factoring, and the second method is completing the square. So the first step is to put your x squared equation in this form, where you have your x squared, then your x, then we're going to have a blank, and then we're going to have our equals, our constant, plus another blank, because what we're doing is we're actually balancing out the equation. In order to figure out what goes in this blank right here, we are going to take and find the b, and we'll take half of the b and we'll square it, and that will be what goes in here. The reason why that works is because what we're looking for is those perfect square trinomials, and we can get more into that as we do some problems. The third step is to place that in to each side, and then what we're going to do is we're going to factor the left-hand side, we'll square root it, and then we'll solve for x, and most of the time we'll get two answers. It'll make more sense after we do a couple problems. So here's problem number 1. The first step is to get it into that form where we have x squared minus 4x plus, I'm going to use a box instead of a blank, equals 5 plus that same blank. So we have our x terms on one side and our constant on the other. The way you come up with what goes inside the box is by looking at this middle term b, taking the b term off to the side and saying, well, b is 4. It's actually negative 4, but we won't really concern ourselves with that too much, because what happens when you take half of it, so you have to take half of b, you get negative 2, but every time you go and you square that, it becomes positive. That's why it's not that important that you think about whether it's a positive 4 or a negative 4, because when you square it, it becomes positive every time. So we're going to have 4, and to balance out the equation, I have to put 4 on the other side. The next step is to factor this. Every time it factors, it will factor where you get x times x, 2 times 2, and then you have to figure out you need a minus and a minus, because that will give you your negative 2 and your negative 2. My point being is if you don't get the same thing inside the parentheses on these, then you haven't done the first part correctly. So you should always get it to factor into the same set of parentheses. And then on the right hand side we have 5 plus 4, which is 9. What we're going to do is we're going to write this together as a single quantity squared. That allows me to do step number 5, which is square root each side. Square rooting each side gives me x minus 2, because the square and the square root cancel each other out. And then the square root of 9 is plus or minus 3. Remember, 3 times 3 is 9, and negative 3 times negative 3 is 9. Last thing is to solve for x, so we just add 2 to both sides. And then we get our answer of, I always like to write the 2 first, and then the plus or minus afterwards. Let's go ahead and figure out what each of these are. 2 plus 3 is 5. There's one of my answers. 2 minus 3 is negative 1. So I'm going to go back through these steps one more time before I do any more examples. So the first step was to have your x's on one side plus a box equals the constant plus a box. You can see I did that. X's on one side, box equals constant plus a box. Second step is to figure out what goes inside the box. So you do that by taking half of b and squaring it. See, I did that off to the side. I found my b, took half of it, and then I squared it. That's what goes in the box. The third step is to factor. Okay, well, it's to put that in there, and then to factor both sides, factor the left-hand side. I did that, and then I wrote it as a single quantity. The fifth step was to square root each side, and the sixth is to solve for x. So I square rooted both sides, and then I solved for x. You'll see some more examples in the next video.